transforming power of gospel love. The New Testament, who speaks most about love for God, neighbour, one another, enemies? Jesus clearly does. John in his gospel and letters certainly mentions love and God's love for us and our love for God. But what about Paul, more famous for justification by faith and relations between Jew and Gentile, works and faith? But Paul over 100 times refers to love in his letters. It was central to his thinking and life. Paul writes of the God of love, 2 Corinthians 13 verse 11. God's love poured into our hearts, Romans 5:5. Of love as the greatest thing in the world, 1 Corinthians 13. Love for Paul was the transforming power of the gospel. Paul experienced our faithful, loving God, who was passionate and all-consuming in his love for the world he created. Paul knew God showed that love in sending his son Jesus Christ, utterly self-giving love in action. Paul was inspired by this transforming power of gospel love. Paul's letters are grounded on his experience of God's love, shown most fully in the death and resurrection of Jesus, where sinners are transformed into children of God, and where we see supremely that God loves you even when you are a sinner and walking far from him. Paul's world, first century Roman Empire, was desperate for love. It was a harsh, unforgiving, cruel, uncompromising, comfortless place. 3% of the Roman world were rich and comfortable, about 10% were getting by, traders and merchants, and the rest, including the 30% enslaved, it was terrible, a serious struggle, hard labour, cramped homes if you had one, no sanitation, contaminated food, inadequate clothing, untreatable sickness, death stalking every moment, fire, disaster. I could go on. Jesus lived as one who loved, shared, cared. Paul urges the little communities of Christians scattered around the Eastern Mediterranean to love, share and care for one another and their neighbour, to live the transforming power of gospel love day by day, to labour honestly, to open their homes, to share their food, to clothe the poor, to stand by the sick, indeed pray for healing. It was a way of life that stood in marked contrast to the Roman world, and the church grew because the transforming power of gospel love showed there was hope and goodness, and they changed the world forever. Can we imagine that in our day, in our lives and in our church communities? Not the world's self-centeredness, greed and violence, but God's transforming power of gospel love living through you and me, generous, joyful, serving.